that made me aware of certain problems within anthropology and made me leave anthropology. Okay, but this left me with a very ambivalent, ambiguous kind of heritage myself in terms of ideas. But I know that the way that I came to be an artist and the kind of artist I did turn into would never have been possible without what I think of as a kind of vaccination. And the vaccination was equally composed of a lot of information about ethnographic objects and an equal amount of information about modernist objects, which I got from art history courses and so forth. And so the two things came together for me. So my decision then was to always use cultural artifacts as starting points in my art, but not to work on these artifacts in a way that would be considered respectable by academic standards. And this gave me a great deal of freedom. But I realized eventually, and I realized this increasingly, that in any case, unless you consider yourself part of the other, you get involved in a mass of misunderstandings. Looking at the other, whether you include yourself or not, is valuable primarily because it tells us about ourselves rather than about the other. Something else we can talk about later. Okay. So, briefly, this piece, which is called From the Freud Museum, was developed from a residency that I did at the actual Freud Museum in London. And I realized that we all live in the Freud Museum. The Freud Museum isn't just this little building in London, which was the last home of Sigmund Freud, but the Freud Museum is part of, we live inside it. You can, everybody knows, and you know, that's a phallic symbol, that's a this, that's a that. You can't get away from it. So I made this work. It was very, very personal. I first started putting things into boxes. The boxes were metaphors for me for archaeological collecting boxes. And you know, when in archaeology you first you collect, then you clean, then you sort, then you analyze, then you draw theory, etc., etc. Freud used the idea of archaeology to describe what he thought was the function of psychoanalysis, that it excavates the unconscious and, like archaeology, brings up fragments or ruins which then have to be made into a kind of narrative or story. So in a way, this piece conflates ethnography, psychoanalysis, personal history, social history, and mixes in a very impure way artifacts and discourses from everything from Woolworths to ancient Egypt. And they're just all put together on one level and puts the viewer in the position of creating the narrative. As a result, it's been a very popular piece, to my surprise. I didn't think anyone would be the least bit interested in this. See, that's a little video, and it's contextualized with the picture of the first magic lantern that was ever made. Each set of objects is contextualized with an image, a representation, also with a label, and all these things put together to sort of walk around the core of the object, and the viewer puts them together as one would put together a puzzle, or Freud would suggest that would be how you would put together the images in a dream in order to get at the meaning, which is suggested by the dream but never explicitly offered to you. Okay, so that's this piece. Okay, so I explain the guiding principle of my work, and in a way this covers the ground, so it lets me do things in whatever medium I feel is appropriate. So I explain it to myself as truth to materials in the very traditional way that I first heard about at Smith. And the first art course I ever took here was about something about sculpture and truth to materials, and I never really understood what it meant, but it's a very, very useful thing to think about when you're making work. But I realized that it means different things to me at different times. And when I talk about my work, I don't like to give the impression that I really understand it, because for me the work isn't finished. I mean, I'm still here, I'm still making work. If I thought that I had a complete understanding of my own work, I wouldn't need to go on making work. It seems to me that each work that you do critiques and evaluates the work you've done before, and so therefore you have to continue with an open-mindedness about what your next piece of work might be. So I always start with cultural artifacts. These are my basic materials, so there's nothing raw or natural about my starting points. And at the same time, I'm not interested in transforming them into anything else, and I might create juxtapositions or series or collages or assemblages or however you see it, paintings sometimes or group works for people. But I don't ever disguise the main elements, which are the starting points. And the starting points are selected because of their ambiguous nature. And I want to find out what it is about them that appeals to me, why that particular ambiguity appeals to me. Okay? That's why each work has its own look or appearance or form, because each work takes its form from the materials that it starts with. That's the kind of truth I do when I work. And the materials that attract me always seem to have a lot that they want to say, and I consider that what I do is collaborate with them in order to get them to say what it is they want to say. So in other words, I'm interested in making visible suppressed or repressed meanings, hidden or unacknowledged or forgotten aspects of what can be discovered through looking hard at things. Looking hard, conveying what you see is always traditionally been what artists do. And sometimes when I'm very pretentious, I say I'm exploring the unconscious of culture, but forget that. I have it written down, but it is pretentious. I want to emphasize again that I think it's very important to maintain the original nature of the materials as a sign. That to me is important, but what I like to do is explore that as much as it can be done in this kind of process. And the final thing I want to say is that even when I'm using what appear to be academic methods, and that's one reason I'm showing you this piece, because it could look like it had an academic component. I know that it's very personal. I have absolutely no interest in the fallacy of objectivity, and I tend to think of it as poetic rather than scientific. And even when I'm using classification in a genre piece like this one, I know I'm not providing knowledge. On the other hand, I'm not providing entertainment. I think art is something else completely. It's not knowledge, it's not entertainment. It's an area where the possibility of meaning is framed and collaboratively or collectively created. And that's why I think it is becoming increasingly in our society an important area for discourse. And I think, the fact that so many people have come to discuss these issues is one sign of that. Okay, that's all I'm actually going to say until we see the piece of work that I would like you to. Yeah, please do that. And then we can talk more.
Naga kaurja uri diko kawe uri kankai goe kau u kaurja irja muge khamu kau tama ikau tata thanse tidi tameha ikau tata anre ikau tata tidi tameha ikau tata house khwedi ye kup ke ha ga kubab na kubab tikau tata kana me Yahuba, Ike Eng Huda, whether called Tarare, Ike Eng Hudaba, Irehu, eating what Wabakao. Yehu, eating, Ika E, Yen Haka, Yekuki, Gweka, Ika Kava, and house when Yekuki Hankai. Ita da kai se tire kai kau na huwa. Huwa irje koma kawa. Ehe ure kawa. Hete kau tang andre tita meha. Muke ha habe kau more yoa. Huba humanga ikita mogu. Ri kote irta mi.
Sauterelle.
Sauterelle.
Truie.
Truie.
Vouzotte.
Courtiser, habiller.
Boule de tac-tac.
Rat de bois.
Rat de bois.
Estropié.
Gobelet.
Choc.
Choc.
Ravert.
Ravert.
Fluxion. Haller.
Suce-fleur.
Suce-fleur.
Prendre la galerie.
Tati baik hungulera tati sit isu bah nyerap di kenyam tam. Tara mana yung nyam tam tu kuala. Yo ti jal ter kabah hoga. Ante seru ku ngangko. Seru ku ngam tu kuala jana ku ngangko tu ko. Tara kan ke tanam tu kotu bi gatat banya yam tende. Yam tende tu hala ngot manya.
Tahu juga tu.
Doet beluile rush. Wel na pater en sneeuw Joe. An elmana doet Joe. Dat vier goden.
La eneni utahaku muro buai dura lo liga sawi. Siruro la kakura nusupusa. Udo bodau siruro gagalo ini. Siruro la abo dale se wai waru tulo. Se buai dura ke oh well ese irela siruro kuku mal kamaidi wai waru tulo siruro gagalo ini bu wai dura na ane di wai dura dena buta ko melo na ane aku ne na ane hale depois buta ko na adi wai wa lalilo ne jadi tahako ke sikilirilo bu wai dura ke to ena ulah marang ke rake Rudo saya di neti nampak eta. Mana?